Okay, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to tackle one of the absolute biggest historical blind spots in human history. Seriously, we're talking about a superpower that literally stood toe-to-toe with ancient Egypt, completely reshaped global technology, and then, well, just effectively vanished from the historical record for thousands of years. I mean, think about your history classes for a second. We all learn about the Grand Pyramids of Egypt, right? We learn about the cradle of civilization in Mesopotamia, and we learn about the philosophers of ancient Greece. But who is this forgotten superpower? We somehow entirely miss a massive piece of the ancient puzzle, an empire that totally dominated the ancient world, yet somehow just slipped right through the cracks of our collective memory. So, to understand how we actually found them, we gotta jump to the year 1906. There's this archaeologist, Hugo Winkler, and he was excavating a site called Hattusa in modern-day Turkey. Now, he expected to find some interesting artifacts, sure, but instead, he uncovered a staggering 30,000 cuneiform tablets. I mean, 30,000. This wasn't just some small ancient settlement. These tablets blew the lid off a 3,000-year-old secret. They had just found the lost archives of a completely forgotten titan. All right, Section 1, the empire you never knew, hiding in plain sight. Let's get into it. So exactly who were these people? Well, they were the Hittites. They were an Indo-European people who showed up in Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, around 2000 BCE. And when scholars finally translated those 30,000 clay tablets, they were absolutely floored. The records left behind by this empire weren't just in some isolated dead tongue. No, they were written in the oldest known Indo-European language ever discovered. This massive empire had literally been hiding right under our noses, deeply connected to our very own cultural roots. Moving right along to Section 2, Rise of the Iron Kings, Conquest and Expansion. Now, the Hittites didn't just casually expand. They absolutely exploded across the map, under the command of their god kings, who, by the way, referred to themselves as my son. It all starts in 1650 BCE, when Hattusili I founds the Old Kingdom and establishes the capital at Hattusa. But then, jump to 1595 BCE. This is wild. Mursili I takes his army and marches a staggering 1,000 miles down the Euphrates River just to sack Babylon. He's single-handedly ending the famous Amorite dynasty. And by 1380 BCE, under Suppiluliuma I, the empire reached its absolute peak, dominating Syria and reducing former rival powers to mere vassals. They were, without a doubt, the ultimate power brokers of the ancient world. Which brings us to Section 3, Inventing the Iron Age, a technological monopoly. Let's compare the tech of the era for a second, because this is absolutely crucial. The entire world at this time was operating in the Bronze Age. Now, bronze is great, but it requires tin, and tin was incredibly rare and super hard to source back then. Compare that to Iron Age tech. Iron ore is wonderfully abundant. It's everywhere. But here's the catch. Turning it into a usable weapon requires highly advanced, incredibly hot metallurgy. So while the rest of the world was fighting with fragile, super expensive bronze, the Hittites actually figured out how to forge iron. It gave them an absolute, terrifying military advantage over everyone else. And they knew exactly what they had. Iron making was guarded as a strict state secret. This wasn't just a minor advancement. This was ancient corporate espionage and national security rolled into one. By keeping the forging process entirely to themselves, the Hittites held a total, uncompromising monopoly on the era's deadliest and most durable technology. If you were fighting the Hittites, yeah, you were bringing bronze to an iron fight. Good luck with that. Section 4, the First Peace Treaty, a clash of superpowers. That inevitable collision happened in 1299 BCE, and I just want you to take in this number for a second. 6,000. That is the upper estimate of chariots involved in the Battle of Kadesh. The Hittite Empire, with their ironclad military, went head-to-head against the absolute might of Egypt under Pharaoh Ramses II. 6,000 chariots crashing into each other. That makes this the largest chariot battle in recorded human history. The sheer scale of this Bronze Age showdown is just awe-inspiring. And what followed was essentially the original ancient PR war. Because if you read the Egyptian historical record, Ramses II claimed this massive, glorious, almost godlike victory over the Hittites. I mean, he literally carved it into the walls of his temples. But thanks to those handy tablets found at Hattusa, we have the Hittite records too. And they show a very, very different story. The battle was actually a brutal, completely indecisive stalemate, and the Hittites retained all their territory. Ramses basically just went home and spun the narrative to make himself look good. But this brilliantly illustrates what happens when two unstoppable forces realize they just can't destroy each other. They compromise. In 1258 BCE, this epic rivalry concluded unexpectedly with the Silver Treaty. This wasn't just some temporary ceasefire, guys. This is the world's first known peace treaty. It included a mutual defense pact, extradition agreements, and it was even sealed with a dynastic marriage between the Hittite king Hattusa III and the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II. It was literally the birth of international diplomacy. And to show you just how relevant this is today, a replica of this exact treaty is currently displayed at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The document that ended a massive war between chariot-riding god kings over 3,000 years ago still sits in the halls of modern global diplomacy as the ultimate symbol of peace. I mean, that is just an incredible legacy. All right, Section 5, the Bronze Age collapse, the perfect storm. I want to walk you step by step through what historians call the perfect storm, because this was a literal apocalyptic scenario for the ancient world. Step 1, tree ring data shows a severe climate drought from 1198 to 1196 BCE, and that caused 3 consecutive years of devastating famine. Step 2, all those starving, desperate populations lead to massive, multi-front invasions that completely overwhelm the Hittite borders. And finally, Step 3, around 1180 BCE, the great capital of Hattusa burns to the ground. The entire empire just shatters. To give you a sense of just how doomed they were being hit from literally every single direction. You had the mysterious sea peoples invading from the west, the Kaskians relentlessly attacking from the north, the Phrygians closing in from the northwest, and the mighty Assyrians striking from the east. It was a terrifying multi-front collapse that absolutely no empire could survive. And, ironically enough, the fall of the Hittite Empire is what finally forced the release of their closely guarded ironworking secrets out into the rest of the world. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, their hidden modern legacy, the Invisible Empire. So in 1180 BCE, Hattusa burns and the main empire falls. But the people themselves didn't just evaporate. By 1100 BCE, remnants of the empire survived and actually thrived as Neo-Hittite states down in Syria. And here's a fun fact. When you read about the Hittites in the Bible, it's actually these later Neo-Hittite states being referenced, not the original mega-empire. They hung on for centuries until about 710 BCE when they finally collapsed for good and assimilated into the local Levantine populations. They didn't vanish, they just became invisible. And their invisible legacy lives on inside you and me right now. Hittite is the oldest attested branch of the Indo-European language family. That language tree branches down into Luwian and Lydian, which connects over to Greek and Latin, which eventually evolves into modern English and Hindi. The 3,500-year-old language of these iron-forging chariot kings is literally the ancient foundational root of the very words I am speaking to you in this explainer right now. How crazy is that? But today, the story is far from over. Hattusa is a modern UNESCO World Heritage Site in Turkey. Archaeologists are still there, they're still digging, and they are still uncovering the secrets of this forgotten superpower. Every new tablet they pull from the dirt helps us piece together just a little bit more of this magnificent, lost civilization. The Hittites built an empire that rivaled the great pharaohs. They essentially invented the Iron Age, and they wrote the very first peace treaty in human history. Yet they were buried under 3,000 years of silence until a single excavation brought them back to life. So it really forces you to ask, what other massive empires has history completely forgotten? What other ancient titans are still buried out there right now, just waiting for us to uncover their secrets? Think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this changes how you look at the ancient world.